welcome. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you who has joined us here, and a very heartfelt thank you for being with us, where we're going to launch our annual, very first annual China-Indonesia survey. My name is Safa Kalilarenti, and I will be your moderator for the next couple of hours. So to provide some background here, the 2024 China-Indonesia survey tried to examine the Indonesian perceptions on the relationship between China and Indonesia that has become more complex and evolving this past couple of years. And key questions addressed here, such as the perceived closeness between the Indonesian government and China, views on China's political impact on Indonesia, factors that could worsen perception of China, as well as insights into how respondents view Indonesia's relationship with the United States. And I think this is a very pivotal moment both for the Indonesia and China, because we've seen also that Donald Trump is already back to the White House for his second term, and we've also seen in his first term how protective his stance was to the US economy. And it is also noteworthy that just last week, President Prabowo Subianto chose China as his first stop for his presidential itinerary, and the recent decision that Indonesia will eventually join BRICS for the next couple of months. I think that is for the opening here. Thank you for being here, and I'd like to introduce you to our panels here. So I think I could see it right now. So to my left, we have Zulfikar Ahmad, who is the Director of China-Indonesia Desk at Chalias, with an expertise in the political economy of international cooperation, with a particular emphasis on China-Indonesia relations, China-Middle East relations, and Indonesia-Middle East relations. He completed his PhD thesis on the Belt and Road Initiatives at the University of Manchester, UK. And beyond Chalias, Zulfikar is affiliated with Busan University of Foreign Studies in South Korea and the Middle East Institute at the National University of Singapore. And to my right, we have Dr. Faisal Karim, who is a senior lecturer in international relations at Universitas Islam Internasional Indonesia. And his scholarly pursuits are centered around the intersection of political economy and international relations, with a particular focus on the dynamics of state institutions and state-society relations in Southeast Asia. He holds a PhD from the University of Warwick and has authored a book as well as numerous influential journal articles, including works on regional integration, governance, and Indonesia's foreign policy. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Johannes Herlianto, who is a lecturer at Master Program in Communication Science, Pelita Harapan University, and a co-founder of the Indonesian Sinology Forum. He previously taught at International Relations Department at BINUS University and China Studies Program at the University of Indonesia. Johannes received his PhD in anthropology from Macquarie University, Sydney, and Vrije University of Amsterdam. He did his undergraduate and graduate degree at the University of Indonesia. So today, to begin our agenda, we'll start with an opening remark from Chalias Executive Director, Bima Yudhistira. Mas Bima, the floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon, honorable panelists here, our colleague, Dr. Johannes Herlianto, and then Dr. Muhammad Faisal Karim is long-time friends back in the UK there. And then Zulfikar Ahmad, of course, our director, China-Indonesia, will be present today. Safa, the moderator. Thanks so much for the attending of the China-Indonesia survey. We are very delighted to welcome all of you, honorable from the embassies and also from journalists, some of our colleagues from the CSO also coming here. Thanks so much for your time. I think to give a brief context about why we did this, this is a big question. First, of course, we think that China play a huge role. What we mean by the China is a Chinese government, Chinese company. Their association is playing a huge role in Indonesia. Also Chinese academics. We also mention as a culturally important in Indonesia in the last, let's say, 10 years under Jokowi administrations. And I think this survey is like a kind of evaluations of how Indonesians, public general, because we have more than 1,500 respondents from all across Indonesia, from all over province, from all over backgrounds, status, class of income. So we think that this is very, very important, and key findings later will be presented about how the general public of Indonesia perceive the opinions toward the China in economic, in security, in Hong Kong, in also Taiwan Strait, Natuna, waters, conflict. This is all the things that we see that very, very important. And also in the next moment when we have, not we, right? US have US President, Mr. Donald Trump. This is also very interesting because the geopolitics perhaps changed, and I see that in the energy and climate action, for instance, previously under the Joe Bidens and the Kamala, we have JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership, with the US and Japan as a lead in Indonesia JETP. But we don't know what happened when the Trump became a president. Is there any chance of the climate leadership in Indonesia that can be taken over by the China? This is very, very optimistic because the China coming here with the critical minerals exploitations, some of the public perceive that the Chinese company, Chinese government let it happen, the damage in the environment, damage in the social, also damage to the local workers in terms of a lot of accidents happening. So what we see in the next China-Indonesia survey in 2025, so this is the first one we have. Next year we also have, so annually we want to commit to publish the series of the survey so we can track all over again what is the difference about what's going on in the US, what's going on in China, what's going on in Indonesia under Prabowo administration as well. So to give that context, I think Prabowo visit to China and then visit to US and some other countries also kind of interesting for Indonesians to see. What is the next step of Prabowo? Want to continue the Jokowi leadership in terms of the foreign policy, welcoming China, less criticize about the China policy in Indonesia, or maybe Prabowo have different agenda? Is it energy sectors, critical mineral will be the next champion between the China and US, or maybe Prabowo have more interest in the makan bergizi gratis, free meal programs, or maybe agricultures, energy securities, food securities, bioeconomy. So this is kind of the big questions that we need public to understand. Because I just feel some of the findings, many Indonesia still didn't understand what is Belt Road Initiative is. So still, if we're asking the public or general public about, do you know the impact of the Belt Road Initiative? Some of them think that, what is the BRI? What is in Indonesia Jalur Sutra Baru, right? Previously named One Belt, One Road. So that's kind of the questions. It's like evaluations how the government can act to answer, to improve the Chinese presence in Indonesia. So hopefully you already got the copy of our publications about the China-Indonesia survey. And please, if you do have some comments, some critique for us to improve better for the next survey, I think we welcome this. And once again, thanks so much for the panelists, because this is very, very important moment for us, and you coming from all over the place to attend this discussion or seminar. Thanks so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And then I get back to Safa.
Thank you, Mas Bima, for the opening remarks. And I think we could start right now to dive deeper into the findings about the survey. Let's hear it first from the lead researcher himself, Mas Fikar.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. All right, to start with, I'm going to summarize the main finding of the survey. The slide, please. All right, next. So this survey, as Bima mentioned, is our inaugural survey, which we will continually update in the next few years. And there are several questions that we ask. And for this particular survey, we have conducted through Facebook ads, so with the usage of Facebook ads and Instagram ads across Indonesian provinces, across different economic background, religious background, and so on and so forth. So basically, we want to make sure that every facet of the society is well captured. So the first interesting finding that we got is that 57% worry that growing Indonesia's economic dependence on China may worsen negative view towards China. Next. Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we got 1,414 respondents randomly selected to ensure that it is nationally representative sample covering diverse demographic across Indonesia, income level, employment, elite, and societal backgrounds. We got this survey, we got the inspiration from the State of Southeast Asia survey carried out by ISIS in Singapore. The difference is that I think the ISIS survey was more concentrating on the elite level. Therefore, in this survey, we want to also cover the societal level. The data collection was online and distributed mainly via social media ads to reach a wider audience, because we believe that nowadays urban areas mostly use Instagram, meanwhile the rural areas still use Facebook. And the instrument is a structured questionnaire on various topics on China-Indonesia relation. Next. The first question that we ask is the perception of the close relationship between the Indonesian government and China. Interestingly, and not surprisingly, 49% believe that the Indonesian government is indeed having a close relationship with China. 38% quite close, meanwhile 11% neutral, and only 1% believe that it is not close. Next. As I mentioned, 49% of respondents perceive the relationship between Indonesia and China as very close. Next. And when we ask the question, what is your view on the relationship between Indonesia and the United States? Of course, the question in relation to China-Indonesia relationship, 50% believes that our relationship with the US could balance the Indonesia-China relationship. 60% believe that it could reduce our dependency on China. 23% believe it could strengthen China-US rivalry, and only 11% believe that it would undermine the good relationship between Indonesia and China. Next. And we asked the question whether China is the most politically influential country in Indonesia. 70% say yes, only 19% say no. But we will see a pattern where around 11 to 12% of respondents answer no idea in several of the questions, which make us believe that many of Indonesian people have limited knowledge as well on foreign policy, in particular China-Indonesia relations. What is your view on that political influence? The majority of Indonesians still believe that China's political influence is positive, 66%. And only 34% believe that China's political influence is negative. Next. 66%, as I mentioned, of the respondents view China's political influence in Indonesia as positive. Next. And then we ask Indonesia's position in the midst of China-US rivalry, and what do they think on Indonesia's position should be the answer. 78% still believe that Indonesia should maintain a neutral stance, with 17% believe that we should seek new partners outside China, Indonesia, only 4% supporting China and 1% supporting the US. It's very interesting. Despite the small number, 4% support China and 1% support the United States in the midst of the great power competition. Next. Respondents strongly favored Indonesia adopting a neutral stance in the competition between China and the US. Next. Do you believe, so the next question that we ask is, do they believe China is capable of leading the world? 51% believe that China is capable of leading the world, with 19% say no and 30% have no idea. Next. 51% of respondents believe that China has the potential to lead the world. Next. What issues would worsen your perception on China? So the majority of people answered China's political influence. This is mainly on China's economic influence. The second one is more like a real political influence, mainly government and political influence, followed by Chinese policy towards Xinjiang. Meanwhile, concerning the South China Sea is number 4, and cultural influence, tourism, academia is only 25%. Issues like Taiwan, Tibet, and Hong Kong is not really an issue. We can see here for Indonesian and their perception of China. So we can see that mainly issues that could worsen Indonesian perception of China is economic closeness, political closeness, and China's policy towards Uyghur in Xinjiang. Next. And then what action can the Indonesian government take regarding the Uyghur Muslim in China? 33% still believe that we should take a diplomatic approach, followed by respecting China's sovereignty. I think this is in line with the government narratives that the Uyghur issues is a domestic issues that we should not intervene. 21% believe imposing sanctions on China through a boycott, and 14%, which is quite significant, people have no idea about the issue in Xinjiang. And 9% ignoring the issue because it could have a negative impact on the relationship between the two countries. Next. And then we ask the question, it's very relevant, on the view on China's response to the Palestinian issues. I think the majority of Indonesians, 43%, believe that China's response is satisfactory, perhaps given the fact that, we know Indonesians have negative perception on the U.S. involvement in the Palestinian-Israeli issues, and 23% believe that China should play a role in resolving the war, followed by 16% China should limit its involvement in the conflict, and 12% they don't want to command, and 6% believe that China's response is inadequate. Next. What is your view? I think this is very relevant given the recent visit by Prabowo to China. What is your view on China's approach to resolving maritime tension in the northern Natuna waters? very interesting, 43% believe that China's response is satisfactory. And this is maybe perhaps a lot of Indonesians have no idea about the issue. And 23% believe that China should play a role in resolving the issues. 60% China should limit, and 12% do not wish to comment. 6% the response is inadequate. Next. What factors could cause a decline in public trust towards China? 49% is China's economic and military power, followed by, I think both are 60% on China is more focused on domestic issues than global issues. China is not a responsible actor, 60%, and 15% believe that China and Indonesia have different view on the global peace. 7% believe that China has an uncertain future. Next. What do you think China can do to improve its relationship with Indonesia? 58% believe that China should ensure mutually beneficial economic relationship. Only 1% believe that there is no way to improve the relationship between the two countries. 31% believe that China should resolve maritime dispute in the South China Sea. So we can see that mostly it's about economic, making sure that the economic ties are mutually beneficial and resolving the South China Sea issue. Next. Do you believe, this is more on the economic question, do you believe China is the most economically influential country? Of course, 84% say yes. What is your view on China's economic influence? 51% concerned about China's economic influence. So, while Indonesian perception on China's political influence is positive, on the economic influence, Indonesian people seems to have some concern. Next. In which areas of cooperation with China and Indonesia do you think the negative impact on economy? Of course, it's most felt. 44% believe on infrastructure, 31% believe on investment, 20% trade, and of course the cultural issue is not really matter. Next. And then what is your opinion on the Belt and Road Initiative? 41% has a positive impact on Indonesia, 42% not familiar with the Belt and Road Initiative, and 70% has a negative impact on Indonesia. Next. So, very interesting, right? Although the Indonesians believe that they have concern on China being economically influential countries, but 42% of respondents are not familiar with the BRI. Next. Next. In which areas of cooperation, economic cooperation that is, between China and Indonesia do you think the negative is most felt? 42% not familiar with this information. And 41% has a, I think I did wrong in this slide. Maybe you can see on the report. We can skip this. Next, sorry. I think, okay. Has China helped with Indonesia's energy transition? 47% answer yes. How can China encourage Indonesia to transition to clean energy? 46% believe about or talking about funding. 26% improving governance in mineral, downstream processes. 19% have no idea. 9% halting funding in the coal energy sector. Next. This is one of the conclusions where 43% of respondents view the activities of Chinese companies as significantly contributing to environmental degradation in Indonesia. 47% believe that China has played a positive role in the country's energy transition. So half-half, breaking the environment at the same time having a positive role in the country's energy transition. Next. This is about culture. Do you think China is the most culturally influential country in Indonesia? 31%. 57% have no idea. I think when it comes to soft power, issues related to academic exchanges, many people have no idea. What is your view on this cultural influence? 60%, 63% concerned about that influence. Next. So the conclusion that I can gather here is that one is that public perception of China are no longer one-dimensional, but have expanded beyond just economic issues. And then complex, very complex, concern about China now go beyond economic dependency or debt trap encompassing social, humanitarian, and environmental issues, though awareness in this area remains limited. Lastly, the public largely support Indonesia's free and active principle, favoring a neutral stance, independent, not aligning to US nor China. Thank you very much. I'll return to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Mas Fikar. And I think to make our discussion effective and not time-consuming, we could jump right into Mr. Johannes' presentation. Right.
Oh, okay. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, first of all, to Mas Bima and Mas Fikar, and to Celios to invite me to discuss the public perception of China in Indonesia, the result of the recent survey. I would like to apologize first because, I miscommunicated with Mbak Yeta. So I thought that it's for the Indonesian audience. So I actually wrote, I prepared a PowerPoint in Bahasa Indonesia. That then I think that it's really, it's not good to present it. So I just decided that we would just discuss it, right? Okay, I think I don't need to use this PowerPoint, please. All right. So yeah. I think what is interesting from today's discussion is that we can see some of the reproduction or continuations of the Indonesians' perception of China since the past, especially since Jokowi era, in the result of the survey today. Because I think we all are familiar with the Indonesian perception of China during the 1960, the Suharto era, right? So during the Suharto, the New Order period, for instance, the domination, the public actually was dominated with the negative perception of China, and the narrative, for instance, which was popular, was the invasions of China, actually by the Mongols. Which was actually conducted by Kublai Khan and his troops, who were actually not by Chinese people, right? And then there was some suspicion toward the Chinese involvement in the 1965 coup by the communists, and also the dominant perception actually was that China actually supported the Indonesian communism. That actually was during the New Order period. But we have actually seen that during the Yudhoyono era, actually there is a different public narrative. If we cannot say, if we do not say it as the public perception, it is actually the public narrative of China. China actually was portrayed during the Yudhoyono era as the friendly nation, as a friendly power. For instance, in 2008, we have seen that there was a movie series appearing in one Indonesian TV series, Indonesian TV production, which actually started by Professor Yusril Mahendra, and it was about the Admiral Cheng He. And actually the portrayal of Cheng He actually was as someone which was very good, friendly, and wished to share the development from China to other countries. So the narrative actually has changed from the Kublai Khan and its Mongol invasions to Indonesia to Cheng He's friendly wish to share the Chinese development with Indonesia. And still during the Yudhoyono era, we can see that the narrative of searching or seeking the knowledge as far as China was very popular at that time. But and at the same time, we can see that China started to pour its development assistance to Indonesia. But among the elites, I think we can actually rely on the study of Daniel Novotny that says that the elites during the Yudhoyono era actually was pragmatic. They didn't have a very positive perception of China, but they were very pragmatic and wished to have some positive benefit from Indonesian relations with China. Actually, if I can share with the PowerPoint, I actually give you some picture, a book by Dahlan Iskan, for instance, Lessons from China. Actually, it was published in 2008. And in the same year, there is a book published by the journalists from Kompas, a group of journalists from Kompas, and the title of the book is The Cermin dari China, or The Mirror from China, which also discuss how China is can be seen as the mirror for us, as the model for development in Indonesia. And also, we can see if actually in our PowerPoint already displayed some, survey from the Pew Global Research from 2005 to 2013, with the questions whether you see China as favorable or not to Indonesia. And the lowest is 58% that says that China is favorable, with the highest is 73% in 2005, which means there was a change of perceptions of China in the Indonesian public back in during Yudhoyono period. But what happened during Jokowi? The pendulum actually swayed to another side again, because we can see that since 2015, we can see that the perception of China has become more negative again after the signing of the Jakarta-Bandung train project, high-speed train project. There was some narrative about the coming of the Chinese workers to Indonesia. Tempo actually in August 2015, if I'm not mistaken, actually appeared with a very big picture, and it says, "Welcome, laborers from China." So the perception actually go back to more negative again. There was a lot of concerns about the concerns that China perhaps will control Indonesian strategic infrastructure through investment. Concern that Indonesia will rely more on China, and also concerned with the Chinese behavior in with the Chinese behavior in Natuna and South China Sea. So it happens during the actually first term of Jokowi administrations, and I think it continued to to the second term of Jokowi era. But what we have seen now is very interesting because we see that there is some reproduction of the previous perceptions. For instance, some of the people, some of the respondents wish that Indonesia can see Indonesian relations with China as its to balance, see Indonesia's relations with the US to balance the Indonesian's relations with China, which is actually interesting. And there is a hope, like Chelios just now presented, that Indonesia may remain neutral, especially when it comes about Sino-US rivalry. Indonesia needs to be more neutral. And another interesting thing is that the respondents see the increase of Chinese influence in Indonesian government and economy as negative. And this is a bit confusing when I saw the presentations, because on the one hand, the public, the 70% of the public actually saw the influence, the political influence is positive, right? But when they are asked which actually can worsen trust with China, they say that the influence in economy, the influence in politics, and the influence in academic will worsen Indonesians' perceptions of China. And then I still see that there is a negative perceptions of Chinese economic power and Chinese military power as well. Even though some actually see that BRI actually is positive for Indonesia. You know, this is for me something very interesting and a bit confusing, because the public see the BRI as positive, having a positive impact, but on the other hand, Chinese economic influence is regarded as negative. Okay, and then there's some other interesting point as well in terms of culture. 57% is not familiar with the Chinese influence Chinese cultural influence in Indonesia. And this is very interesting, given the fact that China actually has tried very, very much to invest its culture and soft power, right, in Indonesia through like providing scholarship to the Indonesian students in China, through Mandarin teaching, try to promote the learning of Mandarin. So, but we see that only that 57% of the Indonesians still see that still not really familiar with the Chinese cultural influence in Indonesia. And even when they are asked their perceptions of the cultural influence, they say that 63% actually are worried and have concern with the cultural influence of China in Indonesia. But there is some, how do you call it, mengejutkan, something that really surprising. That is that 51% of the Indonesian people, at least the Indonesian respondents, are sure that China has capacity to become a world leader, right? Which is perhaps not in line with the elites, I think. Right? And then the other surprising result is about 40% think that China has already taken the right step in terms of Natuna, which is really, for me, also interesting and surprising. In conclusion, we can see actually that the survey that Chelios has conducted actually has a result which is reproductions or not too many different from the survey that had been conducted by some other in the past. Which is interesting because this means that there are many of the perceptions that still stay, even today. I think in 2017, ISIS also conducted a public survey, not the elites only, and also another Indonesian public survey was conducted by ISIS. I think it was published by Diego Fossati and also Burhanuddin Muftadi in 2022. And I think some of the findings are similar with the finding that we have now. So we can also see that Indonesians' perceptions of China can change to a certain extent. Okay, but I'm afraid that the negative take of China will still stay because it has been there since history. I mean, since the historical past. And the other interesting thing is that even though we talk about Chinese economy and Chinese economic influence in Indonesia, many actually still see the Chinese economic impact in Indonesia negatively. Okay. And another thing is the culture that we just discussed. While we talk more about the Chinese culture, Chinese educations, the Mandarin language, but still many in Indonesia are concerned with the rise of, or with the influence, the cultural influence of China. And finally, I think we should, when it comes to the Natuna, we should actually compare the result of Celios with some other survey, such as conducted by, I think, ISDS, right? Which says that, you know, the majority of the Indonesian people, you know, are regard the South China Sea, you know, regard Chinese behavior in the South China Sea as a threat, right? So different from the public that has been surveyed by Celios. So that's actually the points that I can share with you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Johannes, for the explanation. And we are going to hear from our last panels here from Dr. Faisal. Right.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much again to Pak Bima and Pak Zulfikar for inviting me to this event and probably providing a critical notes on the survey itself, even though I might provide my own readings on what's happening when it comes to Indonesia position regarding the US-China rivalry. So first of all, I think when it comes to survey like this, we need to take it as a grain of salt because, you know, a lot of survey might need to basically operationalize what does it mean by China. Who's China that you're talking about? When people think about China, what they do mean, right? Is it Chinese company operating? If I'm part of the Chinese company, would I see myself as a part of the Chinese influence? Or is it more about Chinese migrant workers that are abundantly appear in Morowali, for instance, that might threatening me? Or perhaps is it Chinese military? Or if we're talking about Natuna Island, or perhaps in the Indonesian border, it would be Chinese fishermen, because nowadays China has used kind of a gray zone tactic where basically they employ not the Chinese military apparatus, but rather more a fisherman through this so-called gray zone tactic. But again, that's the first thing. And secondly, who is the audience, right? Is it, again, I do believe that in Indonesia, we need to separate the two broader audience. First, what we call as a elite audience, which basically a lot of people interested, and the broader audience, right? And in fact, even the broader audience, as I'm gonna show you soon, we need to unpack as well, because Indonesian publics is very much fragmented, and more importantly, when it comes to foreign policy issue, and I think it's happening elsewhere in the world as well, it's not really an immediate issues, right? it's not something like for instance, economic issues. It's easily assessed. I mean, a lot of a survey every time there will be a pilkada or election. You know, some kind of an economic issue or political issue or perhaps a security issue may be easily assessed. But when it comes to foreign policy, let's say, what does it mean by foreign and active? Again, the same goes with BRI, right? I don't think it's a really good question if we ask Indonesian public what does it mean by BRI. In fact, even students in the elite level, in an elite institution, may not even understand what does it mean by BRI. But again, I have kind of a, 2 months ago, I did my fieldwork, ethnographic fieldwork to Morowali in Central Sulawesi, and then apparently, I think it's the survey is kind of a resonant as well to this kind of a very much what they call it, a very much localized and bottom-up approach that I'm kind of doing 2 months ago. And surprisingly, when we ask people surrounding in area where a lot of Chinese investment, a lot of Chinese presence, not only in terms of the capital, but also in terms of people. I mean, like a 200, I think, 70,000 Chinese migrant workers basically were there. And when I took a plane from Makassar to Morowali, right, in fact, 19% of the passengers basically Chinese migrant workers. But surprisingly, despite such Chinese presence, if you ask people, the farmers or perhaps people living their entire life, surprisingly, they don't really think that China is a bad thing, right? I think it's a very kind of a resonate of what you're saying on the impact of economic benefit that China actors bring to this kind of a local level district. Surprisingly, it was more on the governments and how the government's corruption to Chinese companies that becomes the most important challenge for many people in that particular BRI project. So I would suggest if we want to really understand how BRI really impact or influence Indonesian public audience, I think it would be better off we operationalize it in terms of Chinese project, right? Think of, whoosh, right? How people think whoosh as a part of its national prideness that, Indonesia has so-called a very much high-tech and developing infrastructure, or perhaps when it comes to, let's say, green transition. A lot of Chinese kind of project in solar panels, for instance, in Sulawesi, in a remote island where basically it was 90% Chinese product, the solar panel. Of course, the investment might be from French companies or perhaps from Middle Eastern companies, from United Arab Emirates companies, but all the solar panels is basically coming from China. So I think that's the first notes that I'm about to share with you. And secondly, when it comes to Uyghur, I mean, this is a very interesting issue because traditionally, Indonesian people are very much sensitive toward Muslim community or Muslim Ummah. We saw during Bosnian War, there is a kind of a increased attachment toward the Bosnian people. The same goes with Kashmir conflict, where basically Indonesian Muslims, which is become the bulk majority of Indonesians, are primarily concerned about the issue. The same goes, obviously, with the Palestine issues. But surprisingly, as a scholars, I'm kind of also puzzled. Why is it in the case of Uyghur, which is, the Western media and non-biased assessment like the UN, think that there is a basically kind of a, it's not really genocide, I forget the name, but it's more like kind of a ethnic cleansing, so to speak, right? What's going on in Xinjiang. But surprisingly, few demonstration. There were demonstrations here and there, but in general, there is no like what do you call it, 212, with huge mass of Muslim demonstration toward China. And partly, I think the issue because it has been captured by the elite, right? The way how the Chinese embassy, how Chinese diplomatic apparatus engage NU, for instance, and in fact, Tarbiyah movement or PKS, usually the one that mobilizing, the Muslim kind of a demonstration toward Ummah issue. Surprisingly, it can be kind of managed by China. So I think in order to understand, at the end of the day, why should we care about audience, this kind of a perception? Is it China, is China really a threat, or is it China kind of a friend of Indonesia, or particularly Muslim Indonesia? But I think there is also kind of a, what we call as a intermediate variable, so to speak, right? Anti-Chinese-ness or pro-Chinese-ness, for instance, is not going to be like a positive asset for China unless those anti-Chinese-ness or perhaps pro-Chinese-ness has been basically intermediated by the elite. So I think this is also the most important thing when we try to capture in what ways positive or negative perception of China might benefiting China eventually. So this is the second thing that I think it will be interesting to compare. I think Indicator Politik tried to compare this kind of a survey. They tried to survey the elites and they tried to survey the public and see where is the gap, right? And surprisingly, I mean, if you ask Indonesian without any kind of a particular framing, what is the best country that you think of? Surprisingly, it was not China, it was not Saudi Arabia, it's not the US, it's not Japan, it was Saudi Arabia. Why? Because most Indonesian, they only went once, not people probably in this room that go a couple of times to other countries, but most of Indonesian, they went only once, which is to Saudi Arabia for pilgrimage. So they might not understand, this BRI thing, this US-China rivalry, and they believe that it was Saudi Arabia who are the most important power in the world because that's what they know. So I think this is also kind of an important kind of intervention that we need to think about how international relation issue is very much absence when it comes to most of Indonesian audience. And thirdly, I think I might want to go to the slides, so it's more a little bit about technicality. So yeah, I think again, this is the kind of I mean, I did also kind of a survey regarding Indonesian perception on China, and the thing that reviewers, or perhaps people who, academic people who tend to read our report is basically, again, this thing, public perception and elite perception. I think this kind of a two broader, different audience should be treated differently. I think that's the first methodological notes that, for the survey, which I think, again, despite of the result, is kind of similar with the other survey have been conducted by either Singaporean-based ECS or perhaps Indicator Politik. And secondly, next, next. On top of those public and elite perception, I think we need to make notes as well on assembling bias. You're focusing on Facebook ads, right? Where basically, obviously, most of the Indonesian use, Facebook. I think one of the most important, apps in Indonesia. But again, there is a tendency of bias toward educated urban population, and more importantly, Indonesian exposed toward different level of policy influence as well. Again, when it comes to migrant workers, Indonesian might be more sensitive because, it's kind of a nationalistic pride, but when it comes to capital, for instance, it may not really, becomes a kind of a level of threat that they kind of influence the way how they think about China. Next, I think this kind of urban versus non-urban. I think it will be interesting, Pak Fikar, to understand more about this kind of divergence. I would hypothesize there will be a different and huge difference between urban educated and non-urban one, partly because it's access to information, right? And in fact, economic priorities. I think when we talk about BRI, I think will be interesting to unpack as well. What does it mean by BRI, so that by unpacking those things, we can see, what is being perceived as a threat when it comes to BRI and what is being perceived as a benefit for Indonesia. And thirdly, I think it's also important to touch upon this kind of a religious and cultural resonance. I think your survey touched upon this issue on Uyghur, but again, it will be interesting to unpack this puzzle, because Indonesia seems to be very active, especially when it comes to Muslim issue. But surprisingly, when it comes to this, it's not really significant, so to speak. But I might be wrong on this. And I think, lastly, on the difference in perception of security threat, right? Again, when it comes to military threat, I don't think China can be seen as a threat, right? But how about other kind of a threat? Because as we know, Indonesian has kind of a sense of historical memory. Pak Mas Johannes has researched about this quite sometimes, right? How Indonesian has a kind of a so-called historical memory, so to speak, on anti-China, right? And if we go toward non-urban area, they might be seen more as a threat, economic threat, than the China itself, and how there is kind of a dynamic interaction between the so-called mainland China and also how this can be reflected in Chinese community, Indonesian Chinese community, and so on and so forth. So I think it's much more nuanced, it's much more, needs to be unpacked on this kind of a perception of security threat. Next. I think, I discussed about this historical memory, in what ways, and threat of China has been basically intermediated with this historical experience. While in the case of the US, despite the US being, killing a lot of Muslim in Iraq, and things like that, but surprisingly, there is no this kind of a historical experience allowing the US to be kind of a, enemy of Indonesia, when it comes to Indonesian public perception. But in the case of China, despite China geopolitically or geoeconomically seems to be resonant with our interests, compared at least with the US, especially in the coming administration of Donald Trump, but the threat perception is still there. I don't know. It might be there. It's because of this. How can we assess this historical baggage? I think it will be interesting as well to explore this. I think that's all from me. Thank you so much. I think it will be interesting to have a discussion from the audience. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Faisal. And that concludes the panel's presentations for today. And we will open the floor for questions now. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. And we will fetch a mic. And please identify yourself first and the institution you are coming from. Okay? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Christine Susana Chin from Gentala Institute. Wonderful survey. Kudos. I just have several points to raise and probably ask to Zulfikar and also Pak Muhammad Karim. Yes. Untuk Zulfikar, for Zulfikar, I think it's probably might be a consideration to put also elements, the differences between the central government and local government. You did have a survey, scorecard, sorry, on the Chinese influence in the Indonesian provincial level. So I think it's sayang gitu loh. It's like you already have that. why not incorporate this, because already a brilliant sort of like directions. The second point is on relations to parties, political parties, probably consider that as well, because all this I think related to the traditional sort of like past understanding of the threat definitions, well known by my former boss Rizal Sukma, identifying the triangular threat of China. China the country, China's ideology, which is the communism, and also Chinese Indonesian like myself. We can debate over the validity of the view, and we can debate over the changes, the shift that has happened with regard to how the public or the elite view these triangular threats, quote unquote. But it might be useful as well to sort of like categorize, to put the element of that political parties, ideology, etc. Because because eventually this is also related to Pak Muhammad earlier mentioned about defining threat, while at the same time not being viewed as not a military threat, which to me was quite surprising. But all in all, you know, the definition, I agree with Pak Muhammad in terms of the definition of threat that needs to be further elaborated. My question for Pak Muhammad, I think you did research on big data analytics approach to read how the Twitter sphere reads RCP. Perhaps you can share that a little bit, and also how you view this methodology to use online surveys, because I think traditionally public opinion surveys in Indonesia is well known in terms of the usual suspects, in terms of you go to daerah, you spread the to all over. But online survey, how do you see in comparison to how you have sort of like with your research on this big data analytics? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. I think as I mentioned earlier, this survey is a work in progress, so we will annually update the survey. And in fact, as I was standing there doing the presentation, I thought to myself, like, I think this question can be further improved. Yeah, there are some points that I think we will take into consideration, and I'm open to anyone who wants to comment, give suggestions, because I think because starting this year and next year we will have the survey prepared a bit earlier, like in January, so that we can, formulate the question better, and more importantly, I think it's important as well to have a review from some people, because this year we had just this idea, and then we did it, and then it happened, and I think it's very important as well, as Faisal mentioned, to differentiate between public and elite, as well as between the central and the local government, and just for your information, for next year we will do both the online survey and the we can say the field survey, because we've been doing a lot of technical assistance in the local government. I think it would be great to use that opportunity to distribute the survey as well. So yeah, thank you for your feedback.
Okay, thank you, Bu Christine. Yeah, I think the reason why last year, basically we also have big data analytics on South China Sea as well, Bu, but not yet written because of a lot of papers need to be written. But basically, you're right. The reason why we use Twitter, because there is an increasing trends among scholars that we can use Twitter as not as a kind of a public opinion ansih, but more about the barometer regarding the, especially if we focus on time sensitive. It will be interesting because a survey requires a lot of an experiment survey to see the causality, while through big data analytics we can see how public opinion change when there is a time sensitive or perhaps event. that requires us to see in what way it's changed. So when it comes to my research on RCEP, I see how basically the discussion slightly changed due to the media reportation. So I think, again, the same goes with, I think I forgot about the last slide, the importance of media to change the way how the public opinion regarding a particular issue. Through big data analytics, we can pay attention on that particular aspect or variable. And secondly, we can also try to see the kind of what do you call it, kind of a social media analysis through network, right? Because, you know, again, it's a totally different area, I get it, public opinion have their own kind of literature everywhere, but big data analytics allows us to focus more on time sensitivity, on who are in charge when it comes to the discourse being enacted, so we know what media playing a big role in framing the perception and how this framing might lead to a negative or positive kind of a reporting or opinion regarding a particular issue. So I think there is kind of a positive or benefiting aspect of doing big data analytics rather than using a public opinion. Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone who wants to ask questions?
Hi, thank you so much. I think the survey is quite useful. So just now, the speakers also mentioned that there's a need to differentiate between elites and the public perception of how they view China. So obviously it'd be very difficult to get survey into the elites. But what is the panel's sense of how the elites view relations with China? Because after Prabowo's visit to China, we see that clearly business deals, there were a lot of business deals signed, so clearly the business industry will have a lot of interest working with China. And then even in things like energy, minerals, there's a lot of potential for future cooperation. So what is the panel's sense of the elite's perception towards China? Because like the panel also mentioned things like elite capture. So even though we know that the public have these views on China, it will not matter to China if they can manage to cultivate the leadership well. So just want to get a sense on this. Thank you so much.
Okay, in my opinion, yeah, thank you, Kathleen, for your question. I think, in my opinion, we have to understand that over the past 10 years, the elite, especially the government, has quite positive view of China, and even now, they're seen as China is seen as a partner, and that's why during the election I was asked, you know, among the three candidates, Prabowo, Anies, or Ganjar, which one has the strongest ties with China? I said everyone. China is a good partner for any president who wants to fulfill their economic promises. And I think the recent visit of Prabowo, you know, with the joint statement on the South China Sea, exemplifies that president, you know, any president who has huge economic promises to fulfill, you know, will actually bow down to China. In fact, during the visit, China has made a strong announcement that China will indeed support, you know, what do you think? The Prabowo's free meal program, right? So I think, yeah, in general, I feel that the elite perception on China tend to be more positive. And even in the public, this is something that I've been thinking about that I might incorporate later on in the survey, is that we have to differentiate between public perception on China or public perception on the government policy towards China. I think during the Jokowi administration, a lot of negative perception on China is not actually on China, but rather on Jokowi's perception, or Djokovic's action towards China. They are not anti-Chinese migrant workers, but they're anti how the government was trying to bring all these workers coming in. So we have to differentiate that, because we say like in 2022, I think, right, Burhanuddin Muqtadi released his survey as well on this particular topic. I say like after the COVID-19, when a lot of people suddenly have a negative perception on Djokovic's leadership, the sentiment towards China is actually increased. But my question is like, is it towards China or towards the government policy towards China? We have to differentiate that. Maybe last question.
Yeah, I think again, when we talk about elite perception in Indonesia, I think my assumption of this Indonesian state is basically a very fragmented one. So when we ask whether it's positive in general, definitely probably that is the case, but we need to also again to unpack the state. Previous article that I've written basically discuss about how when it comes to maritime dispute between Indonesia and in Natuna Sea, for instance, you see a lot of different kind of attitude between Coast Guard of Indonesia, or what we call it Bakamla, as well as Indonesian Navy, for instance. And the reason for this, not because China being seen as a positive or negative, but rather because of how this kind of China factor put into play into their kind of interest as well. That's the first thing. You can see as well when Indonesian elites view, let's say, China investment, right? Obviously, those elites that have a kind of an oligarchic relation with with this kind of extractive industry are much more inclined toward China, and in fact, it becomes kind of a open arm kind of a approach. But if you look at again those people who see the kind of inequality and injustice tend to view this as more kind of a negative. So I think it's kind of tricky to see whether Indonesian elites, well, in general, is much more positive. But the problem is in what ways this China factor can be utilized for their own interests. And I think in the case of Indonesia, it's difficult to see. People might think about hedging strategy, right? There is a grand strategy. I think it's not like a Malaysia or Singapore who have a very coherent state apparatus. For instance, when they say we're going to hedge toward China, it means hedging strategy. But when it comes to Indonesia, I don't think there is a notion of hedging strategy, right? There is no strategy in hedging. Yeah? It's kind of an oxymoron concept, at least from Indonesian point of view, because what we see hedging is basically kind of a contestation of interests that kind of a different between one apparatus and another. One kind of anecdote that I can share with you is that people might always ask Indonesian military, why would you don't create more military joint operation, exercise with China? Why it's always with Australia, with the US? And the reason is obviously very, very easy, because China doesn't give money to provide exercise, while when it comes to the US, they provide kind of a logistic and things like that. So you see, it's not about hedging, it's not about free and active try to engage other countries, more about, logistic. Yeah, I think that's all from me.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, but again, when we talk about the Indonesian elites, I don't think that we have one kind of Indonesian elites, right? We should see the difference between the business elites, the military elites, and the political elites. And I think we should also differentiate between the government elites, that are still attached to the government, and the oppositional elites, or those who are outside the government but have some influence, So I think that's why I agree with Mas Faisal that the elite perceptions of China and Indonesia are divided and fragmented. Perhaps the business elites perhaps like to have to see the Indonesians growingly inclined to China, but political elites we can those who are outside the government perhaps they can use these China's and the government's closeness to China as a card to criticize the government, and those who are within the government, even though sometimes they also have some negative perception of China or some concern with China, they cannot actually speak it out because they know that it's the the government policy to how do you call it to improve relationship with China. Military elites perhaps from what I heard perhaps actually have some traditional negative perception or see China as a threat, right? But still we can see that at the moment because of the Indonesian's pragmatic policy, most of them actually become have to do what the top Indonesian leaders ask them to do. I mean, this is more complicated when we talk about the Indonesian elites' perceptions. Thank you.
I think we could have more questions. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists, Pak Jo, Mas, and Pak Faisal. First of all, my name is Akbar. I'm from Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia. And congratulations to Celius for the survey. I think this is a very great initiative and breakthrough for capturing the public perceptions towards China. I think my, maybe I would like to say some comments and a question as well. So I think from what we get, we can see that there's a gap of perception between the elites and the public towards China, right? For example, as Pak Jo has clearly stated that maybe the military things they have a particular thinking towards China, and then maybe the elites in the economic sectors, and they have other thinkings, and I think this is really demonstrated in, for example, when our elites have a comfort level and great confidence in engaging with China, for example, with the growing economic cooperation, and then we could see as well, for example, the recent influx of Chinese textile or products and coming to Indonesia, and then suddenly there's a wide protest from the public, from the industrial sectors, and then suddenly our government, our Mendak back then, they said they want to put up to 200% tariff, right? So we can see there's a, despite the elites have such a comfort levels, when the public say there's something that they are not feeling satisfied, and then suddenly somehow the policy then in the second could flip just like that, right? And then I think my question would be, how do you think how could we transform the perception into from a economic oriented or elite centered oriented perspective that is I think a very positive spectrum towards China, to a more positive public perceptions, where I think the Indonesia-China relation could be more meaningful and have a soul, because there's a connection between the public and not only the good perception from the elites, but also good perception from the public. What modalities that do you think China have, and also what they can do, and also what should we do as well? What should Indonesia? I think Pak Jo, this is an honor to have can hear your perspective as well, right? Your great analogies, and then I'm also open to the panels to answer the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mas Akbar. Yeah. First of all, I don't think that that Indonesians, the public and elites have that kind of difference in their perception of China. I think from my observations, I mean, I see that there are mutual, how do you call it? The mutual influence. The elites will influence the public, and the public perhaps will influence the elites. But mostly, perhaps, the elite will influence the public, because the elite is not always, if we see the elites, not only as the government elites, but also the opinion leaders. Because back to what I have observed, even though the government perhaps has some positive perception of China or positive information about China, the opinion leaders, in a democratic, Indonesia is a democratic country, in a more democratic atmosphere, the opinion leaders will have some channel to say, right? And they sometimes also influence, and they sometimes will make it an issue. For instance, back in 2016, when we saw the Chinese workers wearing military attires, walking close to the Indonesian's military headquarters in Halim, I think it was not the government elites that actually made an issue. It was actually the people. Actually, it was actually perhaps some non-government elites that actually made it an issue, right? So I don't think that I don't think that we should. I don't think that we can see that the people have some negative perception of China when the elites actually have the positive, and we will actually transmit this positive to the people. Actually, in fact, what happens is the elite itself, in my view, the elite itself actually are divided, and those with the negative perceptions usually or may be able to spread, this negative, If we see it as negative and positive itself. But I actually will also think that it's not always about negative and positive, right? But it can be also with about a critical view, right? Even because the government perhaps has some interest and some pragmatic attitudes or pragmatic policy with China. Okay, and I think the people, the elites outside the government actually will criticize, will have some critical view as well, right? So this is what happens, and the problem is, again, the negative news is often more attractive than the positive news, right? Okay, that's one thing. But on the other hand, perhaps I think I should also, ask us to think about what is going on recently in the past few days, right? Well, actually, the foreign policy elites outside the government are really, I think, including some people in the FPCI, perhaps, are really, how do you call it, ranting about Prabowo's decisions to do the joint statement, talking about about the South China Sea. He didn't talk about. I mean, the joint statement did not talk about the South China Sea, but talk about the overlapping claims, etc. But a lot of like foreign policy elites outside the government, except one or two who are actually attached to the government, but still shout something, still scream and say that, criticize the government. I think, I'm afraid, I'm sorry for not giving you an answer, but this is more complicated. We cannot just like convince the people, okay, because it's there, it's dynamic. Thank you so much, Mas Akbar.
I want to understand your question correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong. See, your question is how can we transform the good perception among the elites so that sorry?
There's a gap of perception and the difference perception
Within elite and public. The elite is good, the public is bad, right? How can?
I'm not necessarily actually.
Okay.
You know, there's a gap, right?
Yeah, there is a gap. So, yeah, from my understanding, yes, there is a gap, and you know, the elite mainly have a good perception, we could say, although it is divided. But as my vice have mentioned, in general, they have a good perception on China, while the public tend to have a negative perception on China. Number one, what I want to say is this. Before I do research on China-Indonesia relation, I do research on China and the Middle East relation. My PhD was on China and the Middle East. And China was seen as a positive force in the Middle East, even until now. The public have a good perception on China. The elite have a good perception on China. And why so? Because the government was able to receive China in a way that is mutually beneficial for both countries. All right? So, you know, although in Saudi Arabia, for example, they have a huge construction on railway with a lot of Chinese workers, there were no opposition towards the incoming of Chinese workers. Although, of course, there are economic factors in this, like, yeah, in Saudi Arabia, there is a limited number of skilled workers capable of developing, train, and so on and so forth. But, yeah, in general, the perception was good. But then, when I focus on China-Indonesia, there is, as Mas Faisal and Bang Jo mentioned, the historical memory. You have the anti-China sentiment. We know this. We have anti-sentiment that has been lingered in Indonesia for quite some time. But then, during the Jokowi administration, I see there is something called, I don't know how do we call it in English, but in Japanese, we call it jarak. Jarak means we know that it's wrong, but we keep doing it, right? So there are two things that I want to mention, political action and political communication. For example, during the COVID-19, we know there is a strong anti-China sentiment that is spreading, you know, COVID-19 coming from China and so on. Although it's wrong, but there is that kind of narrative spreading. And then we know that people have negative perception on Jokowi's policy in handling COVID-19. We know that there have been so many critics to Jokowi prioritizing economy over health. And then, all of a sudden, the government kept deciding to allow 500 Chinese workers to coming in. And people keep getting mad for this, because the government was not cautious enough in taking the political action. And then, the second thing is political communication. When people are criticizing why the government, when I was told to stay at home, the government allowing 500 workers to coming in, when people are mad about this, Pak Luhut suddenly mentioned, we need China. We need Chinese investment. All of this action and communication with the government worsen the perception of people towards China. So sometimes, I'm one of the person who believe that the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese foreign policy, is actually absolutely 100% beneficial to any recipient country, as long as they can receive China properly. Now, the homework is that I don't think we have received China properly. I don't think we we're able to make sure that, you know, the economic opportunities available in the Belt and Initiative project or any project that China brings, well, we haven't received them well. So the question is not on, the homework is not on China, but on us. How can we receive China properly? By doing this, I think the public perception will get better and better. But when the government keeps doing what they're doing, you know, during Jokowi administration, not only political action is bad, political communication is also bad. Sometimes, you know, you can do bad political action, but people still feel you positively because you have good political communication. But during the last 10 years, I don't see good political communication as well. So that's my answer.
Just quick comment probably. I think, again, from the survey, we see that 66% view China influence positively economically, and in general, 70% China hold the most political influence in Indonesia. But again, as you mentioned about, you know, when the garment industry in Indonesia collapsed, and then people easily blame China, and somehow, you know, it's also easy for Indonesian government to just, you know, increase the tariff. I mean, it's the most easy. You don't need to think as a ministry of trade. You know, you don't need to think about, you know, just increase the tariff. But the problem is not there, right? The problem is not about a lot of Indonesian textile is not really competitive against China, but because of the high cost of labor, you know, a lot of things. But for the past 20 years, no plan to fix those things. But for Indonesian government, it's easy, just increase the tariff to 100% and then everything's going to be fine. I mean, it shows as well that, you know, despite the benefit that incurred by the Chinese, you know, investment, and the Indonesian government feel positively toward China, but it's not really stay very fixed, because if there is a kind of a political upheaval and things like that, you know, Indonesian government can easily blame China, and I think this is kind of a relations that Indonesian elites use or view China is a very kind of a transactional. It's not, I don't know, in terms of Japan, for instance, we've been there in 1974, you know, there is a malady, feel like Japanese company also behave like a Chinese company now, but somehow we passed that era already, and I think Japan is quite seen as a positive kind of a power, but China not so much. I don't know, probably because of the historical baggage as well. It could be, you know, something else, but I don't have the answer for that. But I feel like, you know, despite being seen as a positive, both by elites and public, there's something with that kind of a outlook that can be changed, you know, in a very short term. You know, I think that's all for me.
I think we could have one more question before we close this discussion for today. Anyone? Okay. I think this has been a very excellent discussion. A big thank you to our entire panel for today's discussion and for shedding light on the complexities of Indonesia and China relations. And we hope today's discussion has deepened our understanding of the China-Indonesia relationship and its impact on both nations. We look forward to continuing this dialogue in future sessions. Thank you everyone and have a great day.